get started, I want to say a huge thank you and how delighted I am to see the Western hospitality that was shown yesterday in Calgary and today here in Edmonton. My mom's roots are from Alberta and decided we wanted to do the Housing Roundtable, and with 2 phone calls to 2 people, which then extended a little bit, I look around the room at close to 80 people here today, and I just can't thank all of you enough for coming and to help the vulnerable communities. So just thank you very much for that. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're privileged to be here on Treaty 6 land. RENA is an Ontario charity which promotes dignity, individuality, independence, personal growth for people with developmental disabilities within a framework of Jewish culture and values. I hope you enjoyed the virtual tour we were showing of the RENA community residents. We currently assist approximately 1,000 individuals in the Greater Toronto area, 500 in our residential program, and 500 in our day program. RENA today manages an annual budget of $40 million, $42 million in capital assets, reflecting 26 locations across the Greater Toronto area, and is funded by the Ministry of Community and Social Services of Ontario. When I was last in Ottawa, I had the opportunity to speak to Minister Hare for a few moments about the Intentional Community Consortium and our ask of the federal, provincial, and municipal governments to allocate 5% of affordable housing money to an underserviced, vulnerable community, namely those with developmental disabilities. We were fortunate to have a similar roundtable in Calgary yesterday with him, and how fortuitous that he had just been named the Minister of Sport for Persons with Disabilities, and our event was the first one he was having. Thank you. And I then contacted, once that was initially set up, contacted Minister Sohi's office and the Edmonton Community Foundation, Martin, thank you, and they all instantly agreed to host one here today. Thanks to a grant from the Ontario Trillium Foundation to determine what is the best way to increase the affordable housing stock for those with developmental disabilities, with importance placed on inclusivity and reducing social isolation, leading to a better and safer quality of life for those with developmental disabilities, we're able to host this roundtable. And again, thanks all for coming. Thanks to incredible support from Robinette Budget, Avery Friedman, who answered my call, was able to secure the shul, thank you very much, and connect me with Capital Region Interfaith Housing Initiative, and Jay Friedman from the city, who both helped build out the rest of the program. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. Minister Sohi, you should know your staff has been most helpful and accommodating, as has Sharon Blackwell and her entire ministry staff from Housing and Homeless Supports in the province of Alberta. Thanks to all of you today, we have this incredible representation from many vulnerable communities and all levels of government. Thank you to Beth Israel Synagogue and the Edmonton Community Foundation for co-hosting this roundtable with RENA and the Intentional Community Consortium. With apologies in advance to anyone I failed to recognize, thank you to MLAs Annie McKitcher, Lauren Dash, David Shepherd is coming shortly, and Denise Woolard. Kelly McCauley, thank you very much. And Katie President Center, where are you? Thank you for coming as well. And West, my apologies. I'm in good trouble. Thanks to representatives from the City of Edmonton and ministry staff and all of you for taking the time out of your busy days to be with us today to discuss how best to assist vulnerable communities with housing and homelessness issues. One of the most important outcomes we're hoping to achieve today is to help organizations such as yours make contact with each other to facilitate information sharing and to strengthen your voices as advocates for vulnerable individuals in need of support. I'd like to encourage this dialogue to continue well past today, so I'll be sending out an attendees list with contact details after the session. If you don't want your contact information shared, please cross off your name at the registration table and it won't be included. I'm also recording this session for RENA's use, possibly on the website and or promotional. If you're uncomfortable with having it recorded, please let me know. We're just going to keep it focused up here for ease, so it won't catch everybody's face, but hopefully it gets everybody's voice. After the welcome keynote, I'll turn the floor over to Katie Souls, President of Souls Company. I think everybody knows Katie well here. To start the roundtable discussion with a few lead-off speakers, general conversation amongst all of us, with a wrap-up by MLA David Shepherd, and then some additional networking. Rather than go around the room and introduce everyone to everyone, which I would like, we just don't have the time, could we just take a minute and introduce yourself around to your table mates, and then I will come back up here.
I'm good. And you? Maybe a second. My car almost drove itself here, so I must have been here at least once.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Something tells me from the chuckles everybody at the tables are eating each other. The important other thing is, let's get social. If anyone feels like tweeting anything out, use the hashtag intentional communities and have a good time. In Ontario, the current situation among individuals with developmental disabilities is alarming. Over 18% of people who are homeless have a developmental disability. 90% of adults with developmental disabilities live below the poverty line. Women with developmental disabilities are 65% more likely to experience abuse. 50% of those with developmental disabilities live with significant medical issues. A 45-year-old with developmental disabilities has the same frailty index as a typical 65-year-old. There is currently a 40-year wait list for those seeking affordable housing with supports across Ontario, with similar numbers across the country. I'm pleased to tell you, Alberta is doing better. The ICC, the Intentional Community Consortium, is an organization comprised of agencies serving persons with developmental disabilities that has been established to help address this situation. It envisions a community that completely and successfully integrates people with developmental disabilities into all aspects of society. There is an urgent need for affordable, accessible, and supportive housing that redirects some of the most vulnerable in our community out of basements, hospitals, prisons, shelters, and long-term care facilities back into homes of their own with the supports they need to realize their full potential as individuals. This can be achieved by dedicating 5% of any funds flowing through the National Housing Strategy for people with developmental disabilities. And that is the message that I would like you to take back to your municipal colleagues who are here, the provincial colleagues, federal. It can be done with the 5% ask. The Arena Community Residence is one way. There are many ways, and that's what we're here to find out what the best ways, both for all vulnerable communities and for those, one of the underserviced vulnerable communities, those with developmental disabilities. It now gives me great pleasure to turn the microphone over to Martin Garber-Conrad, who's the CEO at the Edmonton Community Foundation. He spent most of his career leading nonprofit organizations, where his accomplishments include several social housing projects, restoring and repurposing historic buildings, and starting a social enterprise, Kids in the Hall Bistro in Edmonton City Hall. And his real claim to fame, he answered the phone when I called to help me get this underway. So Martin, thank you very much. The mic is yours.
Thanks, Gary. It is an honor and a delight to co-host this roundtable with my esteemed colleagues, some of whom I've met 10 minutes ago. Unlike some events where one has to beg and twist arms to get people to attend, there was an immediate and positive response from so many people to this invitation. And others who were inadvertently overlooked heard about it and asked if they could come too. And of course the answer was yes. Not surprising, really, there is a strong commitment in this community to ending homelessness and providing better housing for all sorts of vulnerable communities. Fellow citizens in a variety of circumstances who find themselves facing homelessness or inadequate housing. There is also a long tradition in our community of learning from folks from away. Speaking of Gary, folks who have good ideas. Gee, I mean, they were good ideas. Good ideas that we might not have thought of yet. Especially when they come to share what they have found that works and invite us to think about what might work here. Especially when the right people are brought together in the room to hear and discuss and learn. That's the opportunity we have today to continue the conversation on housing and homelessness for vulnerable communities and to explore possible solutions that might be implemented here. There's never an event where absolutely everyone who could or should be present is able to attend. But we have a particularly auspicious group assembled today from a variety of sectors, organizations, and perspectives, experienced in this work and absolutely committed to ending homelessness. Thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you very much. So, on one of my first trips to Ottawa, I had the pleasure to see an old friend of mine who's now an MP, Francesco Cervera, who was minding his own business, having a snack, and I saw right behind him was Mr. Sobey, who I hadn't had the pleasure of meeting yet. So I cornered Francesco, and I said, "No, Francesco, can you do me a favor? Can you just introduce me to the minister? Because ultimately, he's the guy that I need to talk to make the decisions possible." Well, he did introduce, lo and behold, you're here today, and I don't think there's anyone in the room that doesn't know the minister, which goes to your work in the community tremendously. So, with no further ado, Minister, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and look forward to your words.
Before I go into my remarks, I also want to acknowledge that we are standing on Treaty 6 land, the land of our indigenous communities, including the Métis community. I'm very pleased to see Audrey and Cecil who are here, and one of the two leaders from Métis communities that I have opportunity to work with and get to know, and they have done phenomenal work. Not only representing the community at large, but also the services and the leadership that they have provided in Edmonton and in the Buenos. Thank you so much, Cecil, and Audrey, for being here. Well, thank you so much for including me in this. The discussion is very close to my heart. I don't know how many of you know that before I got into City Council, I worked for Edmonton Transit for almost 15 years, and initially started with Edmonton Transit in the TAPS unit, in the Disabled Adults Transportation Unit, and came to know many people City Council. I came to know my good friend Karen Lipovici, who was taking the lead at that time on the affordable housing file, and with her I was able to learn even more about the need about all types of housing needs in our community, from social housing to affordable housing, and to how we actually provide market housing people who are able to move into their own homes. And through that work, Karen and I also work together on employabilities for people with the disabilities. And I have many friends that I was able to form those days, and those friendships continue today. And I also want to share with you that how the people I served in my capacity at DAS, how it actually helped me to be where I am today, in a way that I have 15 minutes to speak, so I'm going to take all those 15 minutes. At that time, when we were working at DAS, our working conditions were not at par with many of the other city employees, and we were organizing to form a union, we were organizing to become part of the city workforce, and what we came to know is that the people who serve vulnerable people are also vulnerable, because they're not treated the same way that people who serve able-bodied people. You don't have the same union rights, you don't have the same benefits, you're working part-time, if you're not working part-time, you're working on a contract basis. So we were able to actually form a very good alliance with the people who we were serving and people who were relying on our services. And they became our allies to actually convince the city that we need to be treated fairly, that people who were serving vulnerable people also needed the respect and same rights and benefits that other city employees were getting. And from those relationships, I still have friends who will help me today in my campaigns and my role in ministry. So I wanted to share that with you, that how our alliances and our allies can help us. I'm also happy to see Kelly. Kelly, thank you so much for being here, because the work we're doing, what we're discussing today, should not be partisan. And it is not partisan. Because this is for serving community. This is for building welcoming and inclusive places for all people to live, where everyone has the opportunity to be who they are as individuals. We all have some sort of disability, but based on certain disabilities, we marginalize people, we isolate people. And that's what we need to change, and that's the work that Gary's organization has been doing in Ontario. There are a number of organizations in our own city that have been leading the work, whether it's Innovative, and there's been Inclusive Alberta, which is used to be community living, and also the Excel Society and Large, and many of the other organizations that I have come to know. So thank you so much for organizing this, Gary, and also very pleased to see the presence of our provincial MLAs, because this is a shared responsibility. Municipal, province, and the federal governments working together to provide opportunities and provide housing for people in need. And I will briefly touch on what government of Canada is doing in this area. As you may know, my ministry is responsible for infrastructure investments throughout the country, and we will be investing close to $180 billion over the next 12 years in all types of infrastructure, including roads, bridges, public transit, recreational, cultural facilities, affordable housing, early learning, and childcare. I think two components that are really near and dear to heart among this group And that also ties into early learning and childcare, and some of the experiences of people with developmental disability is related to having that inclusive approach to service delivery and having that wraparound services, whether they're living at home, whether they're living in a group setting, whether they're living independently. So that need for the kind of a holistic approach and comprehensive approach to service delivery, and that's exactly the conversation that Mr. Duplo is having with his counterparts. This is so fundamental. You know, we talk about inclusivity, we talk about not leaving people behind, and those people who are being left behind are the most vulnerable in our communities. And we need to work together in order to meet those needs. And I'm very happy that this gathering is happening, that we are talking about these issues, that as a community we try to tackle these issues, and also finding linkages, how they are actually not just housing, but how income help and income support and people who live in poverty and low income people, and how they are struggling to support if they have a child who is living with developmental challenges. And I think that's what we need to work together on. So I'm very pleased that you have invited me to take part in it. Unfortunately, I will not we will be able to stay for the entire session. I have to leave out a little before 10:30, and I'm glad, and we will work with you. And Mr. Duplo is very committed on this file. Our government is committed on this file, and we see the support from I would say every party in the House supports these kind of initiatives, because they really touch on people's needs. They really touch on how we have a collective responsibility towards each other, and how we can empower people to fully participate in the community. And this also makes economic sense. It does make economic sense, because the labor challenges that we face, and we have a group in our own country, in our own community, that are underemployed, that are not fully, their capabilities are fully tapped into. So we can create relations where we can actually tap into their abilities to contribute. It's a benefit for all of us. And I have seen that in the work that Karen was leading at City Council, where we actually saw people working in settings where they made the whole workplace a healthy place, by bringing that joy, bringing that excitement. And it's known that when you have inclusionary policies related to workforce, your whole work environment improves, and that helps with the productivity, that helps with many of the other aspects of creating a healthy work environment. So this is a win-win for all of us, and I hope that we will continue to have these discussions on this topic. And thank you so much for including me. Thank you so much to all of you for being here.
Rest assured, we'll continue having these discussions. Just let your staff know when I call to set up a meeting. It's all good. Thank you very much. Your presence is greatly appreciated. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Katie Solis, President of Solis & Company, to handle the roundtable. I would consider introducing Katie, but something tells me she knows if you weren't here, leave the minister does. So thank you very much, Katie.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. When Ed Stark, we will be meeting later, called, I thought, boy, this is going to be fun, and this is going to be meaningful. So Solis & Company, if I was organized enough to have business cards, you'd see that it says Solis & Company, transformation through consultation. And we believe that the answers to community issues and society issues are right in the room. And our job is to tap into those answers and unlock them. And I've had the privilege of working with many of you, and Karen, those early days of ending homelessness, the mantle you took and the charge you led, was phenomenal, and we were involved in that. My own family's also been touched by homelessness, as I think many families have been, and I've seen our family scramble to try to find housing. And we also have two young men in our family who have disabilities, whose parents are very, very concerned about what their future brings as they age. And so this has a lot of personal meaning for me as well. When I began thinking of all of you, many of you whom I consider friends, and many of you are friends I just haven't met yet, I began thinking of, as the minister said, the incredible dedication and passion that exists in this community to galvanize, to come up with new solutions, new ways of doing things. And then when I looked at the panelists, even more so, very impressed with the quality of leadership we have in this city. And I was trying to think of the words to describe this, and of course, I couldn't find them. But Robert Frost, who is more noteworthy than I, has a poem that, I know many of you, so you'll indulge me reading poetry. But this reminded me of all of you and of our panel. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation. As my two eyes make one in sight, only where love and need are one, and the work is played for mortal stakes, is the deed ever really done, for heaven and future's sake. So I think all of us have that. When we think of our jobs, our roles, it's avocation and vocation becoming one, and I think Robert's service sums it up beautifully. Our first panelist is Jan Reimer, the Executive Director of the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. I've been privileged to be in a room with Jan, my jaw just dropping as she's come up with articulate statement after articulate statement and innovative, creative ways of leading the community to recognize this incredible need. So, Jan, if you'd like to come up, please.
Well, thanks, Katie and Minister and Madam President and Mr. President from Region 4 there. Really a pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk a bit about the intersections of domestic violence and developmental disability. And for those of you, and I think Jay, who's served on the Interagency Council on Homelessness with me, and Susan, know this is kind of a hobby horse of mine. But the inability for women fleeing domestic violence to be able to find housing is a major barrier to safety. And often when we think about housing, we don't think about safety, and that's where, in terms of women's shelters and the types of programming and services that are provided, how safety has to be built in to any housing initiative that is undertaken. Because the stakes for women are high when they're falling into homelessness. They face the chance of losing their children because they're in inappropriate housing, in substandard housing. They face the risk of sexual assault and physical assault if they stay on the streets. And they also have the risk of their abuser. So it is really important to build in that safety component when we're talking about housing and woman abuse. The other significant impact is that upon children, because the more and more we know now is how being traumatized in the womb or in being bearing witness to their mother's abuse can affect the very architecture of a child's brain, and is in itself a significant contributor to youth homelessness. Some stats say at least half, if not more. So what we are calling upon, both as the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters, and I'm also the co-chair of the Canadian Network of Women's Shelters Canada, is that an analysis of family violence needs to be integrated into the National Housing Strategy and the National Housing Fund. 7 out of 10 people who experience family violence are women and girls. Research has shown that a majority of homeless families are led by sole support mothers particularly looking at developmental disabilities. And women with developmental disabilities, as was said at the beginning, are 65% more likely to experience abuse. And other studies show that women with developmental disabilities are more than 10 times likely to be sexually assaulted than other women. And we know how underreported sexual assault is. In our own shelters, not all shelters track how many women have developmental disabilities when they enter shelters, but of those that do, this last year, we saw some 255 women. In terms of prevention, we also know that one of the major risks of femicide is when a woman is pregnant, because while we all think that is a very wonderful time, in fact, it is a risk factor for femicide, and the abuse escalates. And it's when women are kicked in the stomach or strangled, cutting off oxygen. They have more miscarriages, they have infections due to sexual abuse. The children have low birth rates, and there is even a greater risk of substance abuse among mothers who are self-medicating due to that abuse. And all of that has an impact on the unborn child. The Healing Journey study of 214 Alberta women found that 74.5% had a chronic illness or disability, and which in almost half of the cases limited the women's activities and limited their employability. We are about to release our own study on women entering second stage shelters, and there we found women upon admission, 33% faced addiction issues, 54% trauma and mental health issues, 11% were seriously considering suicide, and 27% of their children had a disability, mental, or physical health concern. And for our women on follow-up, over 14% were unable to work due to the severity of the injuries they sustained as a result of their abuse. So developmental delays and disabilities are key issues for children entering Alberta women's shelters and are a significant challenge as well for their mothers. Common examples include speech delays, learning disabilities, sometimes complicated by poor school attendance due to the chaos in the home. In extreme cases, children are notably underdeveloped. And again, that same longitudinal study that I spoke to earlier showed that 35% of children had at least one, women had at least one child with a disability, long-term illness, or had special needs. So this is not just one segment of the population of women in Canada. In this case, it doesn't matter what your race, your ethnicity, if you're rural, if you're urban, if you're new to Canada or First Nations, or your sexual orientation or gender identity, because it's usually the femininity that is under attack. We know that this is an issue for many, many women. And we also know for women that are accessing second stage shelters that they are at greater risk. In fact, 22% of the women in our second stage shelter study were severely injured, and their DA scores showed them that they were at very high risk of being killed. And that risk is actually increased from last year to this year. So I guess how does this all relate to the homeless partnership strategy? We need to be a part of it. And for too long, we have not. In fact, the last government with the homeless partnering strategy disadvantaged women's shelters since its inception. In Alberta, the province took the position that they wouldn't build any new women's shelters because we were providing temporary accommodation, and that just didn't fit with the definitions at hand, and probably still doesn't. And so all the investment was into permanent housing. And very little attention or focus was given to the specific safety needs of women and children that were fleeing violence. For instance, in the federal-provincial agreement, they dedicated $160,000 a year for the capital and renovation costs of women's shelters. And over that 10-year period, we saw Alberta's population skyrocket. And even today, we're now seeing the results of that because women and children are turned away every day. So we have a number of reports and a number of recommendations, and some of them we've actually had the opportunity to meet with Minister Sohi about a year ago. I guess one on the top of our list that often isn't recognized is the underfunding as well as for them, I think I always try to let people know how seriously underfunded they are in comparison to provincially funded shelters by about 60%. So the children that are coming into those shelters, the women that are receiving those services from those shelters do not have the same level of supports as women who are off reserve, and that has to end. We would like to really call upon the government. There's a number of recommendations. This is on the Canadian network page, and then you'll see this on our webpage shortly in terms of the results of second stage. But by and large, we're just really saying, work with us, make sure that these intersections are there. And when we're planning capital projects, make sure that the operating and the capital go hand in hand so that the services that can be provided. I frequently get people saying, how do we start a women's shelter? Saying, oh, if we build one, we'll get all sorts of money. And I have to tell them there isn't a shelter in this province that ever was built that had money guaranteed when they opened. In fact, it was a labor of love and commitment by many involved. So we really welcome this opportunity to have a chance for dialogue to see how these many intersections can help to support the needs of abused women and children. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Jen, for shining a light and continually elevating that very important issue. Next, I'd like to invite Rabani Batya-Friedman to join us at the podium. Rabani Friedman is the coordinator of the Capital Region Interfaith Housing Initiative, and I know we've been a beneficiary many times of their wisdom and their insight as we seek advice on going forward with different initiatives. So, Rabani, thank you.
So we're wearing two hats. As the pastor of the Beth Israel Synagogue, we welcome you here. We are very honored on behalf of the rabbi and president of the board of directors. Really honored to co-host the event today. Such an important, and I thank Gary for contacting me. Really, truly an honor. And I also wanted just to thank personally Luba Allen, who was she definitely deserved that, who really put this all together as I was out of town. So there's a Canadian faith-based think tank, Cardis, I'm sure you've all heard. They recently laid out a social cities research program on what makes a great city and how do we get there. In its first report, Religion and the Good of the City, University of Alberta Professor David Gore relates the following story. St. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople and Doctor of the Church, challenged his own bishops to resist a temptation offered by Emperor Arcadius, a temptation that would be beneficial to the building of church institutions and provide them with more public presence. It is hard, I should think, for bishops to resist an offer to develop institutions. The emperor had promulgated an edict banning all street people from Constantinople, the city of the world's desire. He then turned and with his left hand granted licenses to bishops to open hostels to house street people and to give them permanent address inside the walls of the great city. This may have been the beginning of the church's engagement with empire and nations in providing social services at a state expense. In response, the crusty archbishop preached a fiery sermon to his fellow bishops, pointing out the implications. If you do not have a bedroll, a loaf of bread, and a candle sitting in the corner of your home waiting for a stranger to knock at the door seeking shelter and sustenance, and if you do not invite the person who speaks a word to you on the street, as you are returning to your home in the hope of receiving a little toward what is necessary to live another day, you do not have a Christian home. If the bishops accepted the emperor's offer, they would be outsourcing an essential aspect of the Christian home. Faith has always played a role in building community. Dating back to biblical times with Abraham and Sarah opening their tents to all passerbyers. I believe that was the first religious social services. Every religion believes in helping the strangers. We all have a different word to describe it. Sikh calls it daya, means to have sympathy and pity for the suffering of others, and to act with affection, kindness as a moral requirement and a moral vow that calls us to respond with social service and and truth in action. Muslims, the idea of itar means to think of the needs and desires of other over one's own, and in the common interest of the community, devoting your life to the lives of others instead of to your own concerns. In Judaism, we have the word chesed, loving kindness, to do good without expecting anything in return. Every parish all over the world, not only in Edmonton, is doing something to help those in need in their own way. The Capital Region Interfaith Housing Initiative allows a space for all the religions to come together, to share their stories, work together, to have a stronger impact on society. The work will be greater when we work together. Cardis also prepared an estimating tool called a HALO calculator. It measures the effect that faith has on common good services. They estimate that for every dollar in a religious congregation's annual budget, the city gets an estimated $4.77 worth of common good services. The HALO calculator is an estimating tool and does not represent a formal research result. However, it is quite fascinating to see an estimate of what the congregation themselves have on the city's common good. So I was curious to see what Edmonton produced. So I plugged in Edmonton. The results are as follows: with an estimation of 703 places of worship, with an annual budget of $427,656,749. You see it there, and multiplied by the halo effect of $4.77, we have a benefit of $2 billion, over $2 billion that we have on Edmonton. And this only includes the places of worship, the mosques, the synagogues, churches, etc. It does not include all the social services that religious institutions began, such as the Catholic social services, Jewish family services, Islamic family services, and so on and so on, E4C. So there is no doubt that religion and faith groups have an impact on social services. But are we doing enough? Are we focusing just on our own people with the same ideological views? Are we helping the vulnerable populations enough? It is complicated, and it's not that simple to work together to make a difference. It all sounds great. Everyone believes in the same belief, but in making a difference. But it does take work, education, and patience to understand the intricacies of the need of not only the less fortunate, but also those that have different beliefs and processes. Let us continue to work together, to learn from each other, to understand each other, to love each other, to have a greater impact on the work that we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very contemplative challenge. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Jay Friedman. Jay is the Executive Director of Housing and Homelessness for the City of Edmonton and has devoted, I would suggest, his entire career to housing and truly models the avocation-vocation philosophy. Many of you know that Jay was instrumental in the first 10-year plan to end homelessness and broke through a lot of barriers. Jay?
Thanks, Katie. Well, I'm going to take this a little different route. So before talking about housing and homelessness in terms of vulnerable communities, I'd like to speak to the inalienable right to adequate housing and the importance of adequate, suitable, affordable housing for all. The right to adequate housing is codified as a human right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25, to which Canada, of course, is a signatory. And the right to adequate housing applies to everyone, regardless of age, economic status, ability, group, or affiliation, and must not be subject to any form of discrimination. UN International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, a little closer to home, the C.D. Howe Institute has said the provision of affordable housing is a basic pillar of a civilized society. And the TD Bank, another one of those left-leaning organizations, has said housing is a necessity of life, yet 1 in 5 households in Canada is still unable to afford acceptable shelter. Access to adequate, affordable housing is a critical foundation for for social inclusion, neighborhood vitality, individual and community health, especially for children, and employability. And to digress just a moment, we recently took forward a policy for City Council, which was titled Diverse, Inclusive, Complete Communities. And what we've advocated is that we should have affordable housing throughout Edmonton's communities. And as a guideline, it should be provided at 10% of the overall housing. But that term inclusion is also, I think, particularly important for the subject that we're here to talk about today. How we include and provide for those most vulnerable. Provision of affordable housing is also a critical foundation to ending homelessness and poverty. To quote the TD Bank once again, we are used to thinking of affordable housing as both a social and a health issue. However, working to find solutions to the problem of affordable housing is also smart economic policy. An inadequate supply of housing can be a major impediment to business involvement and growth and can influence immigrants' choices of where to locate. I know from personal experience, we're seeing, for example, millennials moving from Vancouver because they can't find adequate affordable housing and coming to our community. Now let me turn to the title of this discussion, Housing and Homelessness, Issues for Vulnerable Communities. Jimmy Carter said, "The measure of society is found in how they treat their weakest and most helpless citizens." So here's a novel concept, radical concept. The only way we're going to end somebody's homelessness is to get them a house. So at the heart of our plan to end homelessness is the concept of housing first, which basically says that in order to end someone's homelessness, we need to first find them a suitable home of their choice without conditions, and then support them in their home. This really turned the old notion that we needed to ready someone for housing, or that they could only obtain housing as a condition of first dealing with their underlying issues, whether they were mental illness, mental disabilities, addictions, etc. Really turned that on its head. And we now know that the vast majority of those experiencing homelessness, housing first works. The Edmonton community has housed now over 6,000 individuals that had been experiencing homelessness. And we led the country in realizing a 43% reduction in the number of homelessness enumerated in our biannual counts. So I've already said that the provision of affordable housing is absolutely necessary to end homelessness. However, for our most vulnerable, affordable housing is necessary but not sufficient. Put another way, it's housing first, not housing only. So for our most vulnerable citizens, they will require what, in my world, we call permanent supportive housing. So what do I mean by permanent supportive housing? Well, it can be defined as primarily targeted to individuals who have a history or are at risk of homelessness. Tenancy is not time limited, so they have an indefinite length of stay in that home. On-site staff support residents. Typically, the on-site staff are present 24/7. And buildings typically have independent units. It could be private or they could have a roommate, but they're not structured as congregate living. Having said that, one size permanent supportive housing does not fit all. There's a range of permanent supportive models. On the light end, if you like, it's what we call tenancy management. It's maybe misnamed because it's really about controlling the visitors more so than the tenants. Moving up the ladder, we have tenancy management and mobile supports. Tenancy management, limited on-site supports, and in-reach clinical care, and then tenancy management, on-site care management, and in-reach clinical care. And the National Alliance to End Homelessness has identified permanent supportive housing as a best practice. In other words, it works. I mentioned earlier, quoted the TD Bank that talked about housing isn't just the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do from a cost point of view. So let me share with you an example of permanent supportive housing here in our city. Diverse City Housing chronicled 40 of its formerly chronically homeless residents over a one-year period, and these were their findings. They saw the reduction of days incarcerated went from 3,700 to 294 days, a savings of $884,000. We saw the reduction of psychiatric hospital admissions from almost 1,400 to 95 days, a savings of $678,000. And they saw emergency room visits decrease from 70 to 11 days, a savings of about $13,000. In another study of 236 intensive need individuals placed in permanent supportive housing, found a 56% decrease in emergency room visits and an 8% decrease in hospital stays. So again, housing and supporting our most vulnerable citizens isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. I have to admit, I do have struggled with the ICC's call for 5% funding for persons with developmental disabilities. My struggle is, I don't think it's enough. And lastly, I think those concern is that sometimes those targets become maximums. But I do firmly support and urge the federal government to ensure that the homeless partnership strategy and the affordable housing strategy do include funding for supportive housing for all persons, all vulnerable communities, including and particularly including those with developmental disabilities. Thank you.
Between the United Nations, the TD Bank, and Jay Freeman, we should have this solved in no time. So thank you very much, Jay. Very, very compelling. I'd like next to call upon someone who's become a very good friend and colleague, Mr. Ed Starr. If you were to look up affordable housing and creative initiatives in the dictionary, you would see Ed's photo. He's nationally renowned, perhaps even internationally renowned as a housing expert, and we've had the opportunity to work together on several occasions. We traveled Alberta doing an affordable housing evaluation and review, and stopped in and visited several housing initiatives, including those for those with people with disabilities, and saw a wide range. And have to agree with Jay, it's just not enough. What we saw, it was just good efforts, but just not enough. And knowing Ed as I do, I'm going to really keep track of time, Ed. 5 minutes.
Those are great words to live up to. Gary's putting up a little slide presentation I prepared, and we've been working closely with Gary and his organization at RENA and others involved in providing housing for vulnerable members of society, and have been working hard on what Gary mentioned, the Intentional Community Consortium. And I'm going to focus my remarks on that whole initiative and issue a challenge to Alberta. Who are we? What is the Intentional Community Consortium? So it's a collaboration of 15 agencies providing housing and supports to persons with developmental disabilities in Ontario. And these range from larger agencies such as RENA with a 40-year history, millions of dollars of funding, care for 1,000+ individuals, to newer organizations maybe started by some local families who have family members with disabilities and are just desperate to see what can be achieved. And we brought them together to collaborate to see what we can do. So why is there a need for this sort of a consortium? We just go by ICC, makes it a little easier. Gary presented some stats on the need, and we just thought we would pick out 2 or 3 additional stats that came out of some recent census material. You may not be able to see this, but I think we'll be distributing copies afterward. So StatCan has produced a few interesting tables that kind of tell a tale. So this particular table looks at the prevalence of co-occurring disability types among adults with a developmental disability by age group, age 15 years and older. And in a nutshell, what it shows is that people with developmental disabilities, many of them have a second or even third issue that they are commonly dealing with. That could be mentally health related. The fourth one that goes way to the top. This is in 3 age groups. So the first column is 15 to 24 years, then 25 to 64, and 65 plus. So the fourth column, for example, is physical disabilities that accompany a developmental disability, and you can see the last column is seniors. Almost every senior that has a developmental disability also has a physical disability, and there's similar relationships in seeing, hearing, mental health, capacity, learning, and memory. So these people are really up against it to be able to realize their potential in society. This is another chart with some proportions of adults with the developmental disabilities compared to those without disability by highest level of education. And the first column there is, the darker column is persons with disabilities, and the lighter column is without a disability. And the first column is the percentage of persons with a developmental disability who have less than a high school education. And 53%, more than half, don't even make it through high school. And you go all the way to the far end, which is post-secondary. Very few with developmental disabilities ever enjoy a post-secondary education, compared to 61% of the population without disabilities. So, and education being a leading indicator of basically the quality of life and an ability to achieve. You can see what the consequences are. This table, which you wouldn't be able to read, the effect of disability on educational experiences of adults with a developmental disability, age 15 and over. What it talks about is these sorts of issues that are encountered by people with disabilities. One of the stats on this chart, bullied at school because of disability. 52% of disabled people report being bullied at school. Education interrupted due to disability, a third. Took fewer courses due to disability, 2/3. Choice of courses influenced by disability, 2/3. So there's a dramatic impact again on the educational achievement and their experience for people with developmental disabilities. And the last little one I'll put up, met and unmet needs for help with everyday activities among adults with developmental disabilities. The dark is needed help but not received, and the lighter is needed help and received. You can see the first one, for example, is getting to appointments or running errands. More people don't get the help they need than do. And it goes down: housework, personal finance, heavy household chores, preparing meals, etc. So there's a great number of these individuals who are just lacking, and there's a gap. And some of our speakers before have talked about in solving housing needs. We're not just talking bricks and mortar. We're talking about filling the gap in day-to-day living. So as we started talking with, I guess Rena was kind of the impetus behind this, about forming this consortium or association, we thought it would be important to develop a value statement. So what we came up with is members are dedicated to help meet the growing demand for accessible, supportive housing for persons with developmental disabilities. The ICC supports an inclusive, community-based housing strategy that envisions collaborating partners building housing developments. So we're trying to expand the supply in communities across Ontario, modeled on the success of existing projects such as the Arena Community Residence, which we showed you earlier. We believe that a coordinated multi-community effort is the best way to generate significant positive results. And we're happy to say that the 15 members that we have to date are from all over Ontario. They're from smaller communities, large cities, and it's really a multi-community effort. Using scale and shared learning will result in the creation of a significant number of housing units designed for individuals with developmental disabilities and other similar support needs. So the idea of sharing information, coming together, exchanging ideas, that's a basic value. And we are committed to the rights of each and every individual supported and increasing choices and opportunities for the individual, helping them realize their potential. So how we operate. We received initial funding support from the Ontario Ministry of Community Social Services and a local charitable foundation in the Toronto area who contributed some funds to enable us to operate this consortium and come together for various activities. Our firm was retained to coordinate these activities. We distribute information and we provide some technical support to members of the consortium in preparing briefs to government, funding submissions, and helping even plan and develop projects. So it's been quite active. We meet regularly by phone, bi-monthly, and at least twice in person annually, where we again exchange information, try and help members move their projects forward. So our proposal, and this has been mentioned numerous times today, and it's not a magic number, it's just an indicator of the kind of support that would really make a difference in the lives of these individuals. We're asking a dedication of 5% of the National Housing Strategy funding towards persons with developmental disabilities. And beyond that, we're asking for direct support to ICC members in the form of federal and provincial funding of $66 million. We worked this out, I'll come to that in a minute, to be used in the development of new supportive housing for persons with developmental disabilities over the next 3 to 5 years. And Gary mentioned that we are asking member agencies also to contribute through community fundraising and their own resources, another 1/3, which is $33 million. When you put those numbers together, we're trying to develop a fund of $100 million that would be sufficient to create over 500 new units for persons with developmental disabilities. Still not anywhere near the need, but a definite start. We've been very active advocating for these needs. Gary and his group put together a reception on Parliament Hill in the spring March's Awareness of Persons with Disabilities Month, and we got 71 members of Parliament to attend, as well as senior staff from a variety of government departments. Some of our tenants came up and spoke about the difference this housing support makes in their lives, and we think we really resonated on Parliament Hill. We've been giving tours of the Arena community residence. We've had several cabinet ministers come, agencies, other groups that are interested in providing housing. We've recently held one of our planning days. Gary and I have been to Ottawa several times speaking to people at agencies like CMHC, trying to give advice on how to formulate their programs, and members of Parliament. And we had a kickoff session very similar to this in Toronto recently that was attended by Adam Vaughan, who spoke eloquently about all that the federal government is trying to do in its budgeting for affordable housing and persons with disabilities. She was right about that going on. So just a couple of brief points. We're proud to say that members of the ICC have a number of projects currently underway. We're building in the Kitchener-Waterloo area a kind of a mini version of the Arena community residence. We've just got funding for a very interesting project in a small town called Almont, which is just outside of Ottawa. And there's an organization there called Mills Community Support that partnered with the local organization that helps female victims of domestic violence, and we're combining both in the same project in a partnership. We've launched Arena Community Residence 2, and we're going to be building another 60 to 70 unit apartment building in the Toronto area. And one of our members is in Ottawa. It's called Tamir, and they put all the plans together of community fundraised almost $5 million, and we're just waiting for the last bit of government support. And we'll be launching about a 35 to 40 unit building there. So we're very active, and there's a lot happening. So my last slide is to say, should we have an Alberta linkage? We've got a room full here in Edmonton. We had a similar turnout in Calgary of people dedicated. They understand the need. Should we expand this to more of a national scale of an association or collaboration? The needs are certainly similar in Alberta. We've got a similar range of dedicated agencies. Should we bring in members from Alberta or even beyond to make this national scale and make sure that our vulnerable communities are always represented and are in the forefront when budgets are determined for housing. So I'll leave you with that challenge. It's something we could discuss a little later on. I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think the idea of the Alberta linkage is a very interesting one. And I know that the MLAs in the room and the MPs in the room certainly feel more involved and invited to listen when it's a common voice speaking, rather than 10 different associations coming with similar asks. So that's something really to think about. I'm going to invite the panelists to join me at the front here. We're just going to have a little conversation.
Brad Perkins, you forgot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was so excited about the Alberta Convention. Brad, where are you? Brad,
Step ahead.
you just drive this home.
I hope so.
Thanks. Brad does excellent work with the Excel Society and has really catapulted that organization into new and exciting places. So despite my oversight, we're thrilled that you're here. Thank you.
Well, I hope you can hear me. I tend to talk with my hands, so I thought putting the mic in the stand was the best idea. My name is Brad Perkins, and I am the President and CEO of Excel Society, and I'm honored to be here to tell you a little bit of our story this morning and to build the argument for separate and distinct affordable housing funding for people with developmental disabilities. Excel Society started in Edmonton in 1964 as the Sheltered Workshop. We've been providing services to people with developmental disabilities since then. Today, we have over 700 staff and we serve over 550 clients in both Edmonton and Calgary. We do that through 40 residential homes, 2 large designated assisted living facilities, day programs, and we even run a small academy to try and train our staff and build our pipeline. Our clients have developmental disabilities, mental illness, and addictions. They are the most vulnerable clients in our society, and we serve them and we provide them with homes, with safety, with the dignity that they deserve. Many of our clients have outgrown the supports of their families, but unfortunately, many more of our clients do not have families to support them. Without the services of Excel Society, they would be in hospitals, a further drain on the acute care system, or possibly homeless. And some of them were homeless before they became in service with Excel Society. From this lens, it is our perspective that the funding that is required for housing people with developmental disabilities does need to be distinct. It needs to be separate, and it needs to be set aside. And I agree with Jay's comments, thank you. 5% is simply not enough, but it is a starting place, and so I'm very grateful for being part of this forum to make this argument. I'd like to give you some specific examples of why that funding needs to be distinct and separate. And I'd like to concentrate on our facility on 97th Street here in Edmonton. It's called Grand Manor, and in Grand Manor, we primarily serve people with mental illness issues and addictions. However, this designated assisted living facility, we made the decision a year ago to make a group home in it. And that group home was, the impetus behind the group home was because the individuals we serve are aging. They require more medical supports than ever before. They no longer could fit within the community residence model, but they still require the behavioral supports that is provided within that model themselves. So they are now bridging two separate and distinct ministries within, or departments within our government. They've moved from health, and they've moved from behavioral supports into health, still requiring the behavioral supports. What our new facility allowed us to do is provide both of those things to them. A barrier-free facility, a facility where our team can provide them with the supports necessary, a facility where our clients have excelled. Their behaviors are lower, their requirement for hospitalization is lower, their recreational activities are higher. They have done amazingly well. It is a huge success story, moving our clients that were in traditional homes into a larger facility, but retaining the group home feel for the people with the developmental disabilities. The issue, though, is that the funding hasn't followed this model. In a residential group home, in a very simplistic example, if a home is worth $450,000 and we have 3 rooms in that home, it's $150,000 per room to house these individuals. In our facility, the Grand Manor, the cost of each room is $265,000 to build it. The funding is based on the community system, not on our group home within our designated assisted living facility. The funding is not there. We are subsidizing it as a nonprofit organization with a loss last year of $65,000. You can see where this is going. Without distinct and separate funding for the individuals we serve out of initiatives like the affordable housing, we are not going to be able to continue with this success story. And this truly is a success story of keeping our individuals part of the community, of ensuring their inclusivity and ensuring their well-being, their safety, and the dignity that they deserve. Without this model, these individuals will more likely than not end up back in the hospital, or perhaps even worse, on the streets. So I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share this story and to make the argument for a portion of the affordable housing funding being set aside for people with developmental disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's an inspiring and also pragmatic and innovative approach that you've outlined, so I really appreciate sharing that. Now I would like to invite the panelists to join me up front, and we're just going to have a conversation and any questions that you may have for any of the panelists. So why don't you come on up, Ed and Jay, and Gary, if you want to come up too, you can. You'll just, okay. You don't need to sit, you can stand for 2 minutes. Okay. Do you want chairs? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, why not?
Okay. So, first of all, any comments, questions, thoughts to any of the panelists that you...
Or your own comments as to what's happening wherever? Broad conversation.
Yeah, go ahead. And maybe stand up and really project your voice.
So thank you very much, everybody. So one of the questions that I've been wondering, I attended the 7 Cities Conference recently, and my question is about fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. One of the presentation that was there was saying that this really was a developmental disability. And I know that there's so much of the overlap and streaming. Where does FASD fit within that 5% stream, or maybe is there a partnership to be developed there with those that are asking for those resources as well?
So where does FASD fit within these parameters, and certainly panelists or anyone else in the room that would like to contribute to the conversation?
FASD is considered to be a developmental disability. It's something that somebody is born with. So yes, absolutely, it fits within these parameters. And organizations like ours, and I know I speak on behalf of several other organizations that are here, we provide services to people with FASD as part of this initiative.
So they would be part of this. Yes, at the back, and then Martin. Go ahead, yeah.
I just want to share that FASD is certainly a part of providing support to people in Edmonton. And there's been some really good partnerships actually developed with the YMCA and Elcor, for example, and with Capital Region Housing to look at providing opportunities for people who are either diagnosed or suspected FASD to create inclusive environments where those individuals are part of a larger building per se with support that is funded through PDP. So there is some really good stuff happening.
Thank you.
It's not enough.
Not enough. Okay. Mark?
I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about the ICC funding model. I think that would help us get a better idea of whether this is an appropriate thing to expand to Alberta and whether there's a realistic chance of it actually working here.
Good question. So we've been operating on a shoestring. So none of the members pay any fees or dues. And we were successful in getting a grant from the province of Ontario and also a bit of additional funding from a local charitable foundation that basically, I'll put it in the neighborhood of about $100,000 annually. That has enabled us to plan events, do a bit of travel, distribute materials. In our firm, we have a communications coordinator who provides materials and sets up the sessions. We've launched a website with the help of Rena. It may not even run to that level annually now that we've got some of these initial costs out of the way. So it could be possible between government support and there are foundations in Alberta to do likewise to be able to operate. So we don't think that's a huge amount of money for the benefits that are being obtained, and that also includes, we've been working with some of the individual groups to do feasibility analysis of their potential projects and so on, and that's included in that scope. So we think we're able to make a difference at that, and it's well worth the effort.
I'd just like to add, we're looking more not for the financial contributions of individuals here. We're looking more for the commitment that there is a need, it's a great need, and it's an unmet need. And that if we work together, we can make significant change. It's the amount of money that the federal government, and hopefully matched by a number of the provincial governments, is putting forward towards affordable housing. This is a really great opportunity to make some significant changes for a very vulnerable community, those with developmental disabilities. But the need is way more than Ontario. So the reason why we're here is not so much to come out looking for money, which we're not, but believe me, we want to set something up here and some funds are needed. As I mentioned yesterday to an individual in the crowd, perhaps this is something your foundation would be interested in helping out nominally with. I would mention the same to the Edmonton Community Foundation, but we haven't had the chat, and that's not why we're here. If you want to, I'm never turning it away. But those here that are interested in committing to build the 20 units, committed to building and having the information sharing amongst all of us, and the commitment that government is vital in their support, but is not the only support. And as those agencies here know that are thriving and doing well, and I'll turn to Excel as you're talking about the stuff you're doing, I think you're talking about me, that's fantastic, is to say that you need the community support with 1/3 of the funds. Okay, another question?
Yeah, that's actually what I was asking about, rather than operating funding for ICCOs. I wanted us to be clear on kind of the funding model for the housing projects, and so that we could think about, does that work here?
That's right. So what we're asking for is the 2/3, which is coming from hopefully federal and provincial, and then 1/3 from private philanthropy, from organizations, from wherever.
Just to be as an example, so One of the organizations that has joined with this, I was mentioning the Mills Community Support in Almont. So they had previously developed a seniors apartment building under a former government program, and there was sufficient land remaining after they built the building to accommodate a second building. So they said, we'll contribute that land free of charge. And then they went to the local municipality who said, well, we will waive all of our development fees and charges because we want to do our part. And then they went through the provincial program, which is called the Investment in Affordable Housing. It's a federal provincial initiative. Submitted our funding proposal and got accepted. It's a small project of 13 units. But the combination of the monies that they're contributing through the lands, the municipal partnership, and the federal provincial program is going to be sufficient to make that project work. So that's kind of one example of how that's happening.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. At the back. You're good? Who else? Okay, go ahead.
I'm Barb McIntyre. I'm president from Clinton, Alberta, and I have a son with a developmental disability who's in his 20s looking to create his own home in the very near future. And, you know, his dream of owning his own home is really important, and we hope that it's embedded in his community with neighbors just like you and I. So in terms of a national housing initiative, what we would be advocating for is for our national federation to work in conjunction with those of us that are provincial counterparts, inclusion, Alberta, BC, and such, to look at more inclusive, individualized funding for initiatives such as, you know, no interest down payments, things like housing cooperatives, trusts on that kind of platform, and to work, you know, us to work in conjunction with our municipalities and financial institutions, as we've already started to do. So that's kind of where we're looking, and we're advocating any national initiative to be directed to.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're absolutely right. Let me just point out that we're asking for 5% to assist those with developmental disabilities. We're saying one way is green and community residence. One way is, as you're absolutely saying, the individual homes. Another way is the community homes. There are lots of different ways, and by no means am I or Ed or anyone standing up here and saying this is the way. But the bottom line is those who've said 5% is not enough, but let's start with that, as that's the start, which there should be and there must be funds. A comment made yesterday was, why not make the RDSP similar to the RRSP and allow those funds to be used as down payments on homes, which is a wonderful idea, and to continue on with that. So no, 100%, we're there.
So a lot of options, creativity, different models available.
Yes, and so, you know, we can work with individuals and families who, you know, have that desire for their own home, figure out what's best for them, versus, you know, supporting the construction of more congregated apartments and housing complexes.
So really enacting that whole, the whole viewpoint, and also don't want to lose your request to work provincially as well as nationally and locally, and connect all those bodies. Thank you. Any other? Yes.
Hi, James Bullard, MLA Edmonton, Mill Creek. So in addition to being an MLA, I was a teacher and a psychologist for a long time, a psychologist. And one of the things I found over the years, especially working with people with developmental disabilities in school, is that this is wonderful, and I think this is an endeavor that needs to be supported and continued. But just speaking on the individual level, the more parents were alongside and understanding of what the challenges their children are going through, the more enabled they felt and encouraged they felt to be able to advocate for their children. And in turn, that will help encourage teachers, caregivers, everyone around them to understand and be more supportive of the children's needs. It really was a ripple effect, I found, to the point where by the time the children were in high school, that if they had that strong network being built up from an early age, they were the most likely to be going into a supportive environment after school. And that was, of course, the really concerning part for the people in that position, the children and their families. And the more support they had and the more they were able to ask for agency support and look out and see that there were things available for them, the more secure they were and the more likely it was that their children would get a secure placement as they aged. I'm finding right now, working with parents of children with PDD, that encouraging them and supporting them is really helpful in making them find their voice.
Yes.
I really would like to thank Mike for the tour he organized a year or so ago of various agencies and places in Edmonton for supportive housing. And I was thinking, seeing we have Audrey here and Cecil, of Ambrose Place and what important work they do, because they are the link, they're one of the links between the Indigenous community and the persons with the need of supported housing. And I think that that's certainly an area of need as we go forward, because it probably is going to meet all the need that we see.
Thank you. So the importance, as you discussed too, of working one-on-one with families and families, parents being that linchpin, all the way through to, as you referred to, Brad, when families aren't available or just don't have the ability anymore, to Jen, when families become dangerous. I mean, so there's a whole lot of empathy in what you're saying and the need to connect to the community. Yes?
Thank you, Lord Mack, MLA Director McFun. This riding is mine, and I appreciate being here today, and thank you to Ravinette Freeman for hosting here in Beth Israel Synagogue. Many people think that the suburban ridings or areas of the city or in the city across the country are relatively affluent and don't have the PDD issues or issues that you might find more associated with inner city areas, but in fact, of course, 20% or so of the population in this area of Edmonton is living below the poverty line and suffers, as we all know, similar issues of PDD and mental health that any other neighborhood will. But that draws me to the question that I have, and that's something that's a problem or practical problem. You know, we want to dedicate funding, we want to get the places built. But there's resistance in a couple of ways to locating these facilities, as well as from builders who perhaps don't want to have impositions put upon them for building certain percentages of dedicated units to serve a social need. So, maybe from a national perspective, how can we best address the NIMBYism we get? And we see examples, strong examples of it in Edmonton, where there was an opposition to building a facility which would serve community in need with wraparound services built in. That seems to be the problem. I mean, it's just housing. People don't seem as resistant to it, but if you get wraparound services and people with so-called problems, and then the suburban communities are resistant to having those facilities built in their areas, and then of course builders are resistant to having anything imposed upon them that might increase their costs.
Thank you, and I think that's a very, very timely question, and one that is going to be interesting to watch with the new initiatives by the city. I'm going to let Jane, who's had a lot of experience with this, tackle that one.
Well, as you well know, it's a difficult issue, and there's no simple answer to it. But that's exactly why I started my remarks with going back to first principles, and that housing, access to housing is a human right. And I think when, frankly, we have to challenge, the city, frankly, have to challenge some individuals when they're objecting to a housing proposal, when it gets offside, when it's really infringing on somebody's human rights, when it's discrimination. The project that I think you're referring to, for example, I described a range of permanent supportive housing. It was really at the low end, the light end. And fundamentally, it was an apartment building. It was on land zoned for an apartment building. What the residents of that neighborhood objected to, and it was really, unfortunately, I have to say, out of fear of the unknown. But they were objecting to who they thought was going to be occupying Well, quite frankly, we don't get to choose our neighbors. Right? I mean, do you have veto power over your neighbor? You know? I don't think so, right? The realtor doesn't come and knock on your door and say, I've got this house listed next door, who would you like to move in? So it has to apply the same way when we're talking about affordable housing and its various manifestations. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing is the policy that I referenced that we took forward to council is really saying we need to have diverse, inclusive communities with a range of housing choices. And so that's trying to get away from this argument where we have basically gone the path of least resistance. In other words, we're going to locate housing where we don't think we're going to get opposition and where we think land is cheap. Right? That's not the right way to go. And I think the third thing is working with BACHA and the Capital Region Interfaith Initiative is we need to get out in front of this issue. We need to talk to communities. We need to till the fields so that when a developer does come forward with a project, you know, they're not up against a lot of the fears and unknowns. We've talked to people openly and frankly about the issues, because there are some issues, to be frank. And they need to ask the right questions. So we need to get out there in front of the issue, and I'm pleased that we're working with the Capital Region Interfaith Initiative to do that.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to the comment in terms of the developmental disability issue that we're speaking about right now. And specifically, we have a home over in Lessard, and I'm not sure any of the neighbors would know that people with developmental disabilities lived in that home. Every neighbor, to Jay's point, could be a problem neighbor. In our facilities, we have 24-hour staffing to help our clients get through their days. In many ways, we're the best neighbor. But I also want to talk about a large facility in a neighborhood. We rebuilt the former North Edmonton school site into Baldwin Villa. It's not this community, but it's a community where 2 old schools were being mothballed, and the community was afraid what was going to happen to its sports fields, what was going to happen to the whole area. And when they heard that Excel Society was going to be taking over with a secured facility, the neighborhood was very concerned. What does a secured facility mean? What does that mean to our safety? We fast forward 12 years later, we just had the Baldwin Villa Fair, where we set up tents for the community to come down and host a garage sale. The community's thrilled with us. The gymnasium from our facility is still part of the community. They can use it. The sports fields are there. We've got a great story about taking 2 potential mothballed schools, turning them into a really exciting facility and making a difference, a positive difference in the community. So to Jay's point, I think that ignorance is part of the issue here.
Yeah, so I'll just further to what Mark was saying to bring the experiences from Ontario here, so I can stand up here and lie and say, NIMBYism doesn't exist in Ontario. Yeah, right. So Rena just opened up a community home for 5 individuals with very, very high needs on the spectrum. And one counselor came, I would say, lunging at Rena, how dare we, how dare we. We had a community meeting and the home just opened. The counselor is now our best friend in the world. So back to Jay's comment of getting on the front of it as appropriate and to say, this is what it's all about. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt goes away and the reception is much greater.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, I just want to because I think, as you mentioned, the collaborative work is very important. Coming together to really talk about all issues, but specifically about this one. One of the things that Jay referenced us, the Capital Region Interfaith Housing Initiative, one of the works that we do is address this issue. We have a specific person on board, Mike Van Boom, our housing ambassador, who organizes workshops along with the city employees to really educate and discuss and take away the fears of the unknown, right? And so that's really, if we could all work together with the faith community, the councils, the city councils, the community leagues, everybody on board having that conversation, I think it would definitely have a great impact.
Thank you. Good answers. And thank you for raising that. Did you have a question?
I
or comment?
Comments, please. I'm a parent of a son with developmental disability. He's 25, and so I am, and I'm also on the board of Inclusion Edmonton. I am just more, I'm an advocate for individual choice. If we had followed society's ideas of what our son should have done, or lived, he would probably be following the route of what you're speaking of. He had a vision to live on his own, and he has been for 2 years in a regular apartment like anybody else with a supportive community. And it works. It was with some work, and but it has been very, very effective, and he's very happy. So if we didn't believe in following his vision, and like those of many others that maybe don't have parents, their family to support them, they too may have a vision of living amongst others, not being identified as the people with the disability, but just by who they are as an individual. So that part there concerns me, is I don't want, and actually my son heard me discussing that I was going to be going to the city panel when he heard about this. So I'm sorry that I'm disrespecting what you're trying to bring about. It just, as a parent of this, a child with a developmental disability, he has the same desires of anybody else, and he wants his own autonomy. He doesn't want to be identified by his disability.
Thank you.
And then living amongst others, just like everybody else.
Like everybody else. Thank you.
So,
thank you.
So I think there may be some misconception. Allow me to clear it up. Number one, I agree with you on your son 100%. RENA's mission is quite simply to assist those with developmental disabilities in whatever and however is feasible and possible. The RENA community residence, and again, it's just one, we have 26 residences across the extended GTA. Some of them are supported independent living, apartments and apartment buildings. Some of them are condos. Some of them are community homes of anywhere from 5 to 7 to 18 individuals. We opened up the first seniors home because there was a tremendous need. We opened up the community residence, but please understand something. The RENA community residence is in the middle of a community campus. It is not out in the middle of nowhere. Someone was saying, I can't remember, cheap real estate opened up something there. We won't even talk to someone if they come to us and say, out in the middle of nowhere, we've got some cheap real estate. Our response is, do us a favor. Give us the land now, so we'll hold it and do nothing with it. Develop the whole community around, so there's a community there. And then let's look at how we can best assist, because, back to your point, there's absolutely no point in warehousing, God forbid, an individual out in the middle of nowhere. The RENA community residence, it's an apartment building. That's all. It's got supports within, it's got concierge within. For those that require tremendous supports, there's a partnership with March of Dimes, Carol, you're somewhere, with March of Dimes and the Ministry of Health Department to take care of the individuals so they can live their fulfilled life. The individuals in the residence, they control the place. They have their own key. They have, very often if there are accessibility issues, they will have the remote fob that swings the door open. Not everybody in the RENA community residence has developmental disabilities. They just may or may not need supports of whatever kind, and it's there, but it's part of a community. There's a community center next door. There's a seniors retirement residence across the road. It's a new and thriving community. So again, I'll just reiterate, and I would ask anyone who's in coming to visit Toronto, let me know and we'll arrange a tour. But to some of your points, when the RENA community residence was first built, there were a number of individuals who feared that, oh my God, it's an institution, what are you doing? The only thing I can tell you is after it's been up for 5 years, after those individuals who, shall we say, had the greatest fears came through, their ending comment was, you can't do something like this, and the answer, and the rationale behind their comment was, now families are going to expect this from every agency, and not every agency can do this at the same level. And I think Carol has a comment.
Yeah, and I think, so thank you, and I want to acknowledge your point of individual choice, whatever that happens to be, and how that's acknowledged. Now, there's been a very patient lady in the back. There we go. We're going to go there, and then we're going to go to Susan, and then, okay, Jay has to go. So we'll just, and Remedy, thank you very much.
Yes,
and thank you for hosting and your hospitality.
We're actually going to this initiative meeting as well from the Archbishop.
Perfect.
That's really addressing the same issues.
Okay,
same
so
time.
Katie, I'm thinking of the halo effect. I've been in a synagogue, and now I'm going to this.
Yes, I know. You've got all
From
your
synagogue
bases, all the bases covered, Jay. All the bases covered.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
I just
we're going to address this, and then we're going to go.
I just wanted to quickly add to Gary's comments. Our vision is to enable individuals to live their full potential. We support people and support homes through to these facilities. And what we're suggesting here today is not to take these individuals and to segregate them, but rather, when it comes to supportive housing, as these individuals age, as your son ages, he may need more requirements within the home himself. He may need barrier-free access. He may need certain things that require additional funding for the home itself, and we require that funding to make it work. So our vision is not about compartmentalizing individuals. It's about obtaining the funding possible, whatever the model is, to support people with developmental disabilities.
Thank you. Good clarification. Jen?
Yeah, I just had maybe a different take on it a bit, because we all come from different groups, and we're all wanting our own housing projects. And there are so many intersections, and I think a big challenge for all of us is how we address those intersections. Because we've got a similar situation. We have shelters. They can't get housing for abused women, so they build something next door. So then you got a whole apartment of abused women, right? And you have a whole apartment here and a whole apartment there. But we intersect with each other so much, and are there ways to encourage greater diversity in meeting the needs out there? But that means taking a step back and looking at how we plan. And when you've got government announcing money, all of us run because it's peanut scramble time, right?
Yeah.
Whoever gets their RFP is going to get the money. And I don't know when we're going to get that opportunity to really look at how we collectively identify those intersections and meet a variety of needs without that kind of imposed segregation because of funding.
Well said. Well said. We've got time for a couple more questions, and then I'm going to ask MLA Shepherd to wrap it up. At the back, you've been very patient. Thanks you.
Well, people who know me would rarely call me patient. I'm a bit disappointed.
Could you announce your name,
So
please?
my name's Robin Acton. I'm actually from Lloydminster. I drove from Lloydminster this morning to come to this. So I think it's a very important issue. I'm part of Inclusion Lloydminster, Inclusion Alberta, and I'm actually a board member of the Canadian Association for Community Living. So we too are very interested in, of course, with the national housing strategy. And what I wanted to do is really kind of put out a challenge, and I really appreciate what Jan just said. And that is that this national housing strategy and the dedication of the federal government to look at this issue, I think, gives us an opportunity and should give us a real pause to reflect on what we've learned to date and try to think about how do we want to push the federal government forward around inclusive housing. 5%, I agree, is not enough. But I think we have to make sure we ask for the right things. So I really appreciate what Jan said, because I think the idea of collaborating and working with people who share this issue of housing is a good idea, but it should be all those that share the issue of housing, so that we look at what is inclusive housing. And when I hear words like facility mentioned, that doesn't, when I think strategy needs to embrace all those options. And when we talk about inclusion, we need to think about what does that look like.
Thank you, and thank you. Well, very, very well said. And I think it's that thoughtful approach that Martin alluded to. If we're going to collaborate and get together, that we have to have some common understandings, and you give us a good perspective. Carol, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carol McGill, and I'm Assistant Director of Independent Living Services for Martin Homeless Canada. What typically happens every time I'm in a room, and it happened again this morning, as someone said to me, Martin Homeless Canada, yes. What is it you do exactly? So although we've been around for 66 years, a lot of people know the name but don't know what we do. Primarily, we provide supports to people with physical disabilities, brain injuries, and seniors. We do partner and provide some services to people with developmental disabilities. We are a partner in the RENA project in Toronto. I am based in Ontario, but I have responsibilities across Canada. And so I'm very pleased to be here today. And I'd like to echo exactly what you were saying. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Robin. Because I think that's why we're really all here today. I was fortunate enough to attend the meeting yesterday in Calgary as well, and this ran exactly the way it ran pretty much yesterday in Calgary. But I think a lot of people in the room were focused on this particular RENA project, and I think it is and has been controversial for many people. But I think that Martin and I was committed, like many other people in this room, to looking at housing, because currently housing is a barrier for people to live independently. And how people live and choose to live independently is going to be different for each and every person who's represented in this room because of their needs. And so, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Gary, but the reason you are here is not to promote this particular intentionally built, intentionally used building. It's to promote the fact that we collectively need to focus on housing options for people with disabilities. And RENA's focus is on developmental disabilities. Martin and I, we're sitting at these tables because we recognize the need for housing for people with disabilities. So I think that it's a collective voice in order for us to do that. We're very pleased with the building in Vaughan because it is and it has been considered innovative. I was saying this morning, I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and so the term innovation really is about collaboration. And the reason the building in Vaughan is successful is that it is serving the whole person. And Martin Homeless Canada is there, and we're supporting some people who were living in hospital. They were living in a children's hospital. They were adults with very high physical care needs. Many people sat around the table and said, absolutely not. This individual has a developmental disability and a high physical care need. They have a ventilator. They can never live in the community. Well, the bill, RENA's bill is meeting that person's need. They are living independently in the community, and that's what they need to live independently, and they are no longer living in the hospital.
Well, and Carol, I think your point of options is very well taken, and I think that's the point there. I'm going to call on Susan, and then the MLA from Meadowlark. Is that no? Susan? Okay, go ahead. And then I'm going to have to wrap it up.
No, we still have time.
We still have time? Okay.
I suspect this will require some follow-up, but I just want to really explore what
Could you stand up, Susan? Susan McGee.
Hi, Susan. I'm the CEO of Home Trust, and we're responsible for implementing a plan to end homelessness in Edmonton. And we've talked about conceptually, again, to your point of intersecting needs and potential projects and populations, and at the same time we're using language that does parse out. We're talking about homelessness, and we're talking about affordable housing, and we're talking about the most vulnerable. And within that, though, I know that there's a number of agencies that are working with us on our efforts to end chronic homelessness, and we really have, and I think, Joan coined the phrase, and I use it in every room, we have haves and have-nots amongst the have-nots, and we, even with new money coming on, we're still really working hard to be clear about when we talk about prioritizing, and when we talk about allocations like 5% or 10%, it's incumbent on us to kind of really explore those numbers and needs more. And in just developing an update to our plan, 10,000 people will experience homelessness in Edmonton this this year. We had to have 6,600 people to see a 43% reduction in our shelter, and we still have 1,200 people on our living rough list that we're working on, working to house. And that doesn't, and we often find ourselves, I guess, we're pitting needs against needs, and that's not my intention, but I really do think it's important that when we talk about the most vulnerable, that we come into that understanding that there are people with developmental disabilities that have never been properly assessed, that live on the streets. And this is, actually there's been a pilot done in Lethbridge by the government of Alberta as part of our initial few years work in the plan on homelessness, with shocking outcomes in terms of individuals who've been homeless for years with developmental disabilities who didn't have the family network to support them, to have assessments that would create access to some of the programs that comparatively to access to a shelter or to be able to get access through even a Housing First program, which has, it certainly has support associated with it, but not anything close to what the PDD services are in our province. So I'm throwing out a bunch of information just, I think, to add a lens to it so that when we use language like the most vulnerable, and we use homelessness and affordable housing in the same room, that we explore that more and more specifically kind of, certainly acknowledge that there remains those individuals, and I think, if we could better understand what's meant by considering persons with developmental disabilities as an allocation of those resources, how we might ensure that with that comes access for those individuals that are not maybe in your numbers right now. Like I want to know more about that, because I suspect that in your numbers, you're not including those individuals that would have shown up in the Lethbridge project, because they just don't have the natural support or the appropriate assessments. And if we could see more of that, I think the enthusiasm for those kinds of allocations of a national housing program might resonate more certainly for me.
Thank you. So the importance of language, the importance of clarity. So you had a comment? Did you? You had your hand up earlier.
And it somewhat ties in. Oh, sorry, I guess it's sound. My name is David Friedland. I'm here on behalf of the Jewish Federation and the Center for Israeli Jewish Affairs. My question is, often when we discuss homelessness and affordable housing, we also look at some of the other marginalized communities that are not traditionally touched on. So my question is more aimed towards recent studies looking at the LGBTQ community and affordable housing and the supports that are needed. But I do completely agree in terms of parceling off allocations, how we can look at that.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Bobby Killian, Gateway Association.
Yes.
I do have
name. Sorry, what's your name?
Oh, Bobby Killian. I'm with Gateway Association here in Edmonton. I have a question and I have a comment. First of all, the idea of choice I think is very, very important. Not just for people who live with developmental disability, but for all marginalized people that are living within our communities. In Ontario, there was a great project, the Rouge Bound Cooperative. I don't know if you're familiar. Jenna Cleese was head of that project, where they developed, in collaboration with a number of families with adult children with developmental disability, a housing cooperative, an entire apartment building. A certain percentage of the building was put aside for marginalized peoples within the community to live, and that has been, kept up as they've gone along. It's worked brilliantly. They've had people with what would be considered significantly complex needs, living with developmental disability, living independently in a healthy, engaged community, inclusively in their own homes, with staffing supports. And so it's a different model. But when we Jen,
different models, yeah.
It's a different model, but when you spoke about safety for vulnerable women, it just kind of brought that to mind for me, because I think, when we talk about vulnerable people and homelessness, there are lots of complex issues. People who live with developmental disability, there's been lots of discussion this morning about, independent living. I also have a son who lives with developmental disability. We have lots of complex issues around he's becoming an adult, his education, his eventually independent living. He wants his own home, he wants his own horse. There's lots, so those issues are different for him than homeless issues because they're affected in different ways and they are very individual. But when we talk about vulnerability and homelessness, I think we're talking safety is one of those key words. And having healthy, engaged communities and having the opportunity for marginalized peoples to be truly included in those communities. Jay spoke to that 10%, which is a model that I've always loved. But how can we, and I'm asking now about the question, look at some of this funding to help to not just develop homes or sort of projects, but to help people to access projects such as cooperatives, co-housing projects, new housing developments. We have a giant one in the Westmont area that's going up. How can we access maybe some funding to work with developers?
And I don't know that anyone has the answers.
Well, I can answer partially to say that one of the members of the consortium is looking at co-housing for seniors based on what's been happening in Vancouver and in the States. Based on some of the work that us and many others have done, the government has recognized, and when Adam Vaughan, Parliamentary Secretary responsible, spoke at the Green and Community Residence at a similar roundtable, and I've heard him in other places, his opening lines are, we're no longer only funding the bricks and mortar, and as Minister Sophie indicated as well, we're funding the supports to go with the bricks and mortar, so that process has begun and will continue. And I would turn to everybody here to continue the advocacy that everyone is doing in talking with your city councillors, in talking with your MLAs, in talking with your MPs, and making sure that they realize that, thank you for the money, that's a good first start, there's more, and this is what it's all about, but you're absolutely there.
Well, and I think if there's a theme that's emerging, it's about, did you have a question? It's about intersection and it's about connection, options, choice, and not the same, bricks and mortar project. Yes?
Good morning, my name is Marilyn Blatu. I'm the Director of Housing for Métis Urban and Capital Housing in Edmonton and Rural North. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for recognizing being here on Treaty 6. I really appreciate that. We're very proud of two programs. We're proud of our housing altogether, but we have one particular program called the Family Reunification Program, and it's just that. It's reuniting the family with children that are in care or in jeopardy of being in care. So we have fee-for-service agreements with Child and Family Social Services. But the whole point of the program is to help the parent or parents that are dealing with addictions or childhood trauma in becoming a healthy parent to their child. So it's an apartment building, and like Jay was referring to, the community's not welcoming certain projects and that, the NIMBY effect. We are very successful with where this program is located, and the community has come together. But it also helps to make our families comfortable in the community setting. Not all the Indigenous people come from urban settings, or a lot of them obviously come from the rural areas, and whether it's settlements or reserves, but it helps them to integrate themselves into the community. And again, we don't want the idea of segregation as well, but at the same time, like Jan was saying, we need to also be aware of different settings that are going to help that program and help the people in that particular circumstance. And then we also have our Renaissance Tower, which is a 90-suite apartment building in the Quarters here in Edmonton. And that building is specifically designed for our people with physical disabilities. It's a wonderful building. If any of you ever want to tour, please ask. I'm very happy. But it helps our seniors with physical disabilities, and it helps them enjoy their lives. And dealing with the aging population, it is difficult transition to a more supportive setting. But the challenges are there for us as well. I mean, it's obvious that our Indigenous groups are obviously growing and coming and needing more, and we just need to help support with it, not so much wraparound supports, but future supports and ongoing supports, like the family with the son wanting to eventually own his own home. Why can't that be? Why can't we transition them and get to that point? What's the roadblocks that we need to help us get through?
Thank you very much. The theme that has been coming through is very much understanding each other's needs, customizing needs, and really being responsive to that. And I'm reminded of maybe started with poetry, I'm going to end up with poetry, but a quote by Henry David Thoreau, that when we're looking at the peanut scramble for money, how would it look different if we enacted the words of Thoreau, who described intentional communities as they cherish one another's hopes, they are kind to one another's dreams. And if we used sort of that lens, we could really perhaps have the kinds of conversations we need to have. I'm going to call upon the MLA for Edmonton Centre. I usually see him at bike lane meetings and at Vision Zero meetings, but he is a man that's deeply, deeply engaged in the community. And MLA Shepherd, if you'd like to offer your closing remarks. And thanks to our panelists.
Well, thank you, Katie, and indeed, thank you to the panelists, and thank you to all of you for being here today. It's an honor to have the opportunity to be here as a member of the legislature from the provincial government, here along with my colleagues, Andy McKittrick from Cherry Park, Lauren Dack from Edmonton Plum, John Carson here from Edmonton Meadowlark, and of course Denise Woolard from Edmonton Mill Creek, all of whom I've had the opportunity to work and talk with many times on these particular issues. And it's wonderful to have all of you here in this room today. I know I've seen many of you around at various consultations, and in particular on the consultations last year for the provincial housing strategy through that Minister Sigurdsson, through Seniors in Housing, who I'm representing here today, was consulting on. And I know that many of you were part of the 1800 Albertans that contributed your thoughts that went into creating that strategy, which was released earlier this year, and is working towards, I guess, trying to help build that framework where all of us are going to need to come together if we truly want to take the final steps that are necessary to eliminate the problem of housing and homelessness, and indeed addressing those issues of poverty here in our province. I appreciate the work that so many of you have done. We recognize that there is an essential role for government, all three orders of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, in getting this work done. But we also recognize the reality that this work does not get done without so many of you who are working with organizations in the community, who for years when government was not there at the table, you were the ones who were out there doing the work, who were finding the funding, who were raising the issues and ensuring that this was kept forward. And now that we are all working together, it's your knowledge and your expertise that's going to allow us to truly understand where the problems and the difficulties are, and help us to continue to highlight the areas where we need to continue to provide resources, increase, I know in many cases, those resources as we're able, to be able to truly address the problems and the issues that we face. Of course, our government has made a capital investment of $1.2 billion over 5 years to build and renovate affordable housing across Alberta. Recognize that's a much-needed investment that's come after years of infrastructure neglect and things that we're building up. But we also recognize that that's just one step. There's going to need to be so much more that we're going to need to continue to work on together. And I really appreciate Rena coming and being part of this, and the support from the Edmonton Community Foundation and others who have made this happen today, in helping us to continue to have the conversations about where these investments are going to need to happen. And indeed, one of the things that I really appreciated this morning is hearing about that intersectionality. how between so many of the different areas where each of you are working, we have so much in common and so many things where hopefully we can work together to maximize these resources and maximize our efforts to have the greatest impact we can for community. And I know, I think I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues here that as we continue in this work, and in particular, the conversations we're going to need to have, I think in particular in Edmonton after our upcoming municipal elections, to work to build these throughout our communities. That me and all of my colleagues are willing to be here and to support you in that work and going out and talking to our communities and working on that piece of education and allaying some of the fears and misunderstandings so that we can work on greater acceptance in our communities and we can work on building stronger communities that are truly diverse and inclusive of all. So thank you to all of you for this opportunity to be here today, to continue to learn from you, to continue to work with you, and we look forward to the opportunity to continue working to ensure these investments that we're making are put to the best possible use. Thank you.
So once again, thank you to everybody. We're right on time, still lots of time for networking. There's some refreshments out on the side if anyone would like. And then my only question to those here, if there are those who are interested in being part of the Intentional Community Consortium, please come speak with Ed and I. And in the meantime, continue to advocate strongly because our voices are being heard and the government's now at the opportune time for some change. Katie, an incredible moderation of the session. Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for coming.